When you think about water in Africa, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's probably images of drought, maybe scarcity. But what if I told you that's really only half the story? Today, we're going to look at Africa's hidden lifeline, these huge underground reserves of water that could literally change everything.
Right, so let's start with the big question. We've all heard this story, right? A continent facing this devastating water crisis. It's a really powerful narrative, but is it actually true? Is Africa really running out of water?
Well, get ready for this number, because it might surprise you. According to some pretty deep research, the entire continent of Africa has only tapped into a tiny, tiny fraction of its total water resources. That number you see on the screen, that's it, just 5%.
So let's just get this straight. This is not a story about scarcity. The water is there. The real crisis, the one we're really going to dive into today, is all about management, about access, and honestly about understanding.
And that brings us to the unsung hero of this whole story, groundwater. You know, it's this hidden resource, this lifeline, that could be the key to solving this crisis, especially for the communities that need it most all across the continent. Okay, this slide really paints a picture of the challenge. We're talking about 300 million people in sub-Saharan Africa who don't have safe water. But look closer, because the data shows something critical. A staggering 80% of them live in rural areas. So this isn't just a water crisis. It is fundamentally a rural water crisis. So how are all these communities getting by? Well, this one number is just incredibly telling. An estimated 75% of Africa's entire population depends on groundwater for drinking. This isn't just some backup plan. For the vast majority of people, it's the only source they have. And this really requires a huge shift in how we think about it. You know, researchers have been arguing that we have to stop seeing groundwater as just a secondary option. As this quote points out, it is a strategic asset for the entire Southern African Development Community, or SADC. That means it's absolutely vital for economic growth, for stability, and for just basic human well-being. And you can see this dependency really clearly right across the region. I mean, just look at countries like Botswana and Namibia. They rely on groundwater for pretty much everything. Their rural communities, their cities, and their agriculture. It's truly the backbone of their water security.
So with a resource this critical, you'd think there would be a solid plan to manage it, right? Well, in a perfect world, there is one. There's this ideal framework on paper that's designed to manage all water resources together.
It's called Integrated Water Resource Management, or IWRM for short. And you can think of it as a big picture approach. So instead of just managing water by itself, it coordinates water, land, and other resources to get the best social and economic results, all while making sure we protect the environment. So how does that actually work? Well, it pretty much boils down to three key pillars. First, you need the right policies and laws in place. Second, you have to build strong organizations to actually carry out those policies. And third, those organizations need the right tools to get the job done. Makes sense, right? But this is where our story takes a bit of a turn. Because, as we all know, there's often a massive gap between a perfect plan on a piece of paper and the messy reality on the ground. And believe it or not, on paper, the SADC region is kind of a model for the whole continent. They've got some of the most advanced water policies out there, all based on that IWRM framework we just talked about. And yeah, they explicitly include groundwater. And yet, this is what the actual assessment found. Despite all the excellent plans, the real-world implementation, how this critical resource is actually being managed, is rated below expectation. So the big question is, why? So, what is going wrong here? Well, a huge part of the problem is this bias towards what we can see, rivers and dams. Because groundwater is out of sight, it's often out of mind. And that creates this chain reaction of failures, not enough monitoring, planning that's just reacting to the latest crisis, and a total disconnect from key sectors like agriculture and health. And the end result? Not enough investment and just plain mismanagement. This makes you wonder, though, is there something about groundwater itself, something inherent to it, that makes it so incredibly difficult to manage, even when people have the best intentions? This really gets to the heart of it. The very nature of groundwater, the fact that it's hidden from view, is its single biggest challenge. It's out of sight, which means it's out of mind, and ultimately, it's undervalued. So let's break down what that really means. First, because it's invisible, it's really hard to connect the well in your backyard to the huge underground resource that it's pulling from. Second, because it's available almost everywhere, you end up with thousands of different wells, all uncoordinated, which makes managing it a nightmare. And finally, its biggest benefits, things like better health, less poverty, are public goods, and they're really hard to put a price tag on. And that's the bottom line. When the true value of a resource isn't seen, when you can't easily measure it and stick it on a balance sheet, it just doesn't get the attention, the funding, or the political will it desperately needs from the people in charge. But okay, the story doesn't end there in frustration. There's a growing recognition of this exact problem at the highest levels, and there's a new push to change this whole narrative. The goal now is simple: make the invisible visible. And this is the really powerful vision coming from the African Ministers' Council on Water, or AMCO. Listen to those keywords: valued, sustainable, and empowered. That is a direct and hopeful response to every challenge we've just talked about. This is a real commitment to change. And they have a clear plan to get there. First, they're going to raise awareness about just how important groundwater is. Second, they're going to build up the capacity of institutions and people to manage it the right way. And third, they're going to grow our collective knowledge with better data and monitoring. This is all about tackling the problem at its roots. So, we're left with this one crucial question. With these new plans in place and a growing political will, can we finally bring Africa's most vital, hidden resource out into the light? The stakes for people's health, for development, and really for the future of the continent could not be higher.